Hello there, I am Carol Crafty Grandma, and today we are going to finish a quilt top. We've got the blocks made. We've put all the blocks together. Now what do we do from there? Well, first you have to put these blocks together. You may have made your blocks. In our case, they were just half square triangles, so there wasn't much to make, but we did make the blocks. Now we have to put the blocks together. We're going to use a method called chaining. I can't remember. That's not chain piecing, chaining, I think. And then we're going to talk about whether we want borders, we don't want borders. If we do want borders, how big. We're going to talk about batting and quilting and binding and all that good stuff. And we're going to get this whole quilt, these pieces of fabric put together to make a quilt. So first thing we need to do is we need to put the squares in order, which we've done. But they're not next to my sewing machine, so I can't sew them together from here. I need them over by my machine. So that's what we're going to do first. I am cleaning out an area to the right of my sewing machine. So that we have room to put each row of squares. We start with the square on the far left and on the top row and lift it up and go across. Keeping everything the same direction, no moving, no adjusting, no anything. And then we take that stack and we put it at the very top to the right of our machine. And we do the same thing for all the other rows. Remember, don't twist them, don't turn them. Keep them upright. When you get over to your machine, set them down so they are facing the exact same direction you started with. I'm still going to run out of room, but we'll see. Alright, so we've got all of the blocks picked up off the design wall and in stacks. Let me show you what they look like. Okay. So there's my sewing machine, just waiting to work. Here are my stacks. You'll notice there's a clip on this one. That's stack number 1. That's where we're going to start. Row 1. Then row 2, row 3, row 4, back up to the top 5, 6, 7, and 8. And the clip is going to move from row to row in that order as we sew keep everything in order so it comes out looking like we want it to. Now let's see, can I make that work better? There we go, almost. All right. Just don't like the way it's facing. I guess that'll have to do. Alrighty. So now I've got a universal 70 needle on my machine because I like to use the smaller needle. To me, it just makes my seams come out nicer. I also have all cotton thread, but it's a 60 weight, so it's a lighter weight thread. Most of them that you're going to find, the Gutermann's brand that you're going to find at most places, that's going to be a 50 weight thread. I order this on the internet, but I've seen it on Amazon. I've seen it in other places, so you can pick it up. This machine automatically defaults to having a knot at the beginning, and I really don't care because I'm going to be using what I call starter fabric or feeder fabric. That way, when I start sewing, I'll sew on this first, and when I get to my first pieces that I'm going to put together, I'm going to have sewing on the whole thing. Sometimes when you sew, you start, because like even here, I've got this fabric put back about halfway. So you usually start sewing a little bit further up, and I don't want to do that. I want to make sure that everything on my pieces for the quilt top are sewn together. It's right now set for needle up. Now I've got it defaulted to needle down. That way, whenever you stop, the needle stops and it holds your fabric in place. Just makes me happy. And then I'm going to drop my stitch length down to 1.5. Normally it's 2.5. Oh, excuse me. So I've set it down lower. You can leave it at the standard length. The finer the stitch length, the less bulk there is under your seams. But more of a problem to tear out. So if you're just starting, you probably want to keep it a little bit the stitch length regular. Or I should say standard. That way you don't have to worry about if you have to tear it all out, because 1.5 can be a pain to tear out. All right, so the first thing I'm doing is I'm taking my little clip and I'm picking it up off of row 1 and putting it on row 2. And then I'm taking the first piece of row 1, being very careful not to turn it or twist it, and the second piece from row 1. Also, no twisting or turning. I did not cut all these little ears off as I went, which I probably should have now that I'm thinking about it, but I forgot. So just make sure you keep your fabric facing the correct way, but I'm going to get my ears cut off. So you're going to be seeing me do this during the whole piecing process. Cutting these ears off as I go. Let's see. Okay, so we've got my two pieces of fabric. I am going to flip them over, or my two squares I should say. I'm going to flip them over so they're right sides together and square it up as best you can. If you've sewn correctly as you've gone along, they should square up quite nicely. And then we're just going to sew them together with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. So now we're going to go to row 2. Pick up our little gut marker, move it from 2 to 3. First piece of row 2, Second piece of row 2. Carefully, without twisting or turning the fabric, cut off your tails. Flip the 2 pieces over on top of each other, and sew. All right, so now I had to slow down and stop a little here because the seam was trying to get underneath the presser foot. We don't want that to happen. So we sew, and there we go. Marker to row 4. Piece 1, piece 2. Cut off my ears. All right, sides together. All right, marker from row 4, back in the back to row 5. Piece 1, piece 2. Okay. All right, where's my marker? It's on 5. Moving it to 6. Piece 1, piece 2. Okay. All right, marker, row 7, piece number 1 and 2 from 6. They decided to come together, so we'll just put them there. Okay, marker. Moving to row 8. Piece 1 for 7. Piece 2 for 7. And row 8, marker gets moved from row 8 back to row number 1. Piece 1 and piece 2. Cut off the tails. Go. Okay. And row number 8. Now you'll notice we've got a seam here. We're going to make sure it faces down. Doesn't get caught up in the foot. Excellent. All right, now we go back up to row number 1. We're going to take our piece of fabric, get ourselves started. Okay, so now we're going to open up row 1. Make sure the seam is there. You open it up so you have the 2 pieces next to each other with the face top up. Sorry, I'm going to move these out of the way so the gravity doesn't affect us right now. Because we're going to take our marker and move it from row 1 down to row 2. And then take our next piece, so the 3rd piece from row 1. Make sure not to twist or turn or make it go in funky directions. Fold it over so that it's facing right sides together from 2 to 3. Line it up, make sure you've got it square. Come on. Okay, so that's row 1. Row 2. I'm going to put these back on my lap, which is going to cause a problem here in a minute, and you'll see why. Well, you can see here. Gravity is going to pull these down, and that's going to make everything twist. So you have to be careful. Keep everything together. So right sides up. Make sure when you open this up, you've got right sides up. Marker gets moved from row 2 to row 3. And then we pick up the 3rd piece for row 2. Now I'm going to have to cut off the wings because tails, wing, whatever you call them. because I didn't do that beforehand like I should have. Right sides together. Line it up along the bottom. Make sure you're straight and square. Now remember, you're not pulling or pushing fabric through. You're guiding it. The feed dogs will do the work. But because of the gravity and how these things are going to want to pull, you want to keep it straight and as straight as you can. Alright, now we're going to go on to row 3. Open it up. Marker goes from 3 to 4. Next piece for 3. Right sides together. Squaring up this to the bottom. Make everything even again. Come on. There we go. Oh, and if you don't have one of these, they're called a stiletto. You don't have to have one. You can get a chopstick from an Asian restaurant and use that. It helps me guide the fabric through to make sure the fabric is going straight and doesn't get caught in the foot. You don't have to run out and buy a fancy tool. You can just use a chopstick. Okay, next row. Marker moves on. And you'll notice that I don't have to hold on as much because the gravity isn't pulling as hard. Once you get about halfway through, gravity doesn't pull as hard, but those first couple rows are always a challenge. Okay, so here's where you want to pull out your chopstick. My fabric is trying to jump up over the top of the foot. That's not good. There we go. Okay. Now we move our marker from 5 to 6. Pull up the piece from row 5. Right sides together. Square up as best we can, and here we go. Okay, open that up. Marker gets moved to row 7. go with our little seam again. So, all right, open, marker to row 8. And we're now on row 8, so marker goes up to back up to row 1. Okay, so we get another piece of starter fabric. Oops. All right, go back to the top to row 1. We get our marker off of row 1, move it to row 2, and get our next piece. Okay, and then we've got row 2. And row 3. Now, if you are so inclined, you are more than welcome to use pins and put these together with pins. There is absolutely nothing wrong with doing that. Okay, the marker goes up to 5. And marker goes to row 6. And I have tried to do this without the marker, and even though I've been doing this a while and I'm aware of which ones go where, it's nice to have that marker and not have to think about which row is which. It's just like, there it is. That's the one I'm picking up. That's where I'm going next. So we're at row 8 again, so our marker is heading all the way back up to row number 1. Alright, marker gets moved to row number 2, bring up the piece for row 1. Get ourselves another piece of starter fabric. Squared up. Piece number, or marker goes to block row number 3. Piece from row 2 comes here. Marker goes to row 4. Piece for row 3 pops up. Let's see, cut. go. Okay. Marker goes to 5. Then we pull up the piece for row 4. Let's see, marker's on 5, so we're moving it to 6. And trimming off our ears. Row 6 to row 7 for the marker. It's just traveling along like a nice little car. That's what I should do. I should get a little car for the Monopoly set to use as my marker, my row marker. All right. Row 6. Row 7. And marker gets moved all the way back up to row 1 again. Last time it's going to make its trip around the rows. And we put row 8 on top. And there we go. Okay, last time through the rows. Let's get our starter fabric down. Oh, well, that's convenient. So my machine just yelled at me and told me that I was out of bobbin thread, which I am. All right. My machine, fortunately for me, allows me to thread my needle, or fill my bobbin from my needle. It's got these 2 pieces of metal on it so that the thread doesn't get caught. And now my bobbin has to face a certain direction with the logo facing upward. And then the thread, well, the thread's supposed to get caught in it, but it didn't. Let's try that again. There's some teeth that the thread gets caught in. All right, there we go. I'm going to turn my speed down twice because winding bobbins at full speed on these machines is a bad idea. Winding them on any machine is a bad idea, but I worked for a sewing machine company that sold these, and I used to have people bring in their machines all the time where they couldn't get the bobbin off of there because they'd done it at high speed and it just warps the bobbin. Now it's supposed to automatically stop. It didn't. I don't know why, but oh, I don't think it was actually done. I think the thread is caught on there. Okay, so that's what it was doing. Let's get rid of all that extra thread over there because we don't need it. Let's get our bobbin back where it belongs. And starter fabric. Okay, back to where we were at. We need to find row 1 again. There's row 1. Take our marker, move it to row 2. Take our piece of fabric, clip off the ears, which if you did it correctly, you wouldn't have to be doing that every time like I am, but I forgot. And I just don't want to have to rearrange these pieces, so I'm going to do them one at a time. And now we're going to sew. Marker gets moved to row 3. Okay, row 4. Marker gets moved from row 4 to row 5, or 3 to 4. This is row 3. See, again, marker is helpful. I don't have to remember numbers. I just look and see where it's at and go, yep, that's what I need to move next. Marker going up to 5. Marker moves. right side to right side. Move the marker. Alright, so all these pieces start getting really cumbersome when you get to the end of this. So just be prepared to deal with a lot of fabric moving around. Now, taking my marker, moving it to row 8. This is the piece for row 7. And then, like I said, this all wants to move around wherever it wants to. So you need to be very careful as you're sewing. Okay, so this is my last piece. So I've taken my marker and I'm putting it away. I don't need it anymore. Right sides together, square on the bottom. Excellent. All right. There we go. And now I am going to put it back up on the wall briefly because I know myself, and in the past when doing this process, I have messed up the order. So just to ensure my eyes, or ensure myself, that I didn't mess it up, I'm going to hang it up, and I'm going to walk. Oh, and I can see it on my monitor there, but okay, it's in the correct order. That is lovely. Ugh. I always scare myself because I've done it where I've flipped just one piece, like that one. So I have to take that apart, and then everything's not in order, and yeah, it's just a mess. So now to trim, let's trim off the starter pieces. And the tails at the end. All right, and here's where you get to decide what you want to do. If you watch other people do this method, instead of standing up like I did and walking over to this board, they would have immediately folded row 1 and row 2 together and taken the seams and finger pressed them so that they butted up against each other. And you're going, what in the world are you talking about? Here we go. You don't need to look at my coffee, or it doesn't have coffee in it. I guess it is technically a coffee mug though. All right, so here are our seams. This is row 1, right here. And this is row 2. And I have finger pressed the seam for row 1 to go that way. And I have finger pressed the seam for row 2 to go that way. So they're facing in opposite directions. And when you put the fabrics together, it's like a lock, because the seams are pressed opposite of each other and they'll butt up against each other. And they will lock in place. And you will have fabric on this side of the seam and on this side of the seam. So you don't have all the fabric in the same spot. And you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to try and do it this finger press way. I don't normally do it this way. Normally I would go and I would iron all of this together. But let's see if I can do this and make it not so uncomfortable for me. All right, so I'm going to do that. And then I go to the next one, next seam, and I do the same thing. I fold them in opposite directions and I butt them up against each other. And I use pins here and not the Wonder Clips because I want 2 points that it's there. If you use the clips, you only get 1 point where the fabric is held together. That's where the clip is. This way you get 2 points and it's more likely to stay than a clip would. All right, let's see, can I get this last one? That doesn't want to go that way, so let's do that. All right, let's do it that way. Okay. So row 1 and row 2 are attached to each other via pins, and we're now going to sew them together. Okay, so I'm coming to my first pin. let's see how it turned out. I hit something. All right, so here is 4 seams. Here are 4 seams. And we're a little bit off. We didn't quite match up. This one, everything's right on where it needs to be. That one's a little messed up. That one's right on. And that one's right on. So, not too bad. Nothing's pressed. Everything looks all poofy. There's no sharpness to it yet, which is one of the things I really like about quilts, is the sharpness. But hey. Alright, so now row 2 to 3. Nope, that's not right. It's got to go that way. So that one has to go that way. There we go. Alright, I need starter fabric. let's see. Let's make sure I have that going the right way. There we go. Okay. And let's see, anything terribly wrong there? No. Nothing totally out of whack. So we're good. And so we go on to the next row. That one goes that way, so that one goes that way. Let's see, that one goes that way, so that one goes this way. Remember, we're not pushing or pulling this fabric. We're letting the fabric do what it wants, but we are guiding it. let's see, that's 1, 2, 3, 4 rows. 4 more to go. I need to do it this way so I can make sure I see which way the seams are already pressed. They're going that way, so this one goes that way. I know once upon a time they sold pins that were like U-shaped, so that it would catch both seams in there. I don't know if they still do that. Since they've got the clips now, and a lot of people are using the clips, I don't know if they still make those pins, but they were very nice for doing seams like this, because you would put it in and it would catch both sides of the seam, so that it didn't accidentally flip. Alright, we're getting there. 3 more seams to go. Okay, that one goes that way. that way. Let's get that out of the way. Make sure that's straight. Whew, almost there. All right. Come on, fabric. There we go. And let's get started. Hold on just a minute. Sorry about that. There was a loud rumbling noise out in front of the house. It was a FedEx truck, as it turns out. Okay, last row. Well, last 2 rows. No, last row to attach, I guess. Okay, where are we at? There we go. Hour and a half. We finally have it all pieced. Okay. Feeder fabric, get the starter fabric cut off. And then, oops, there we go. Tails. Excellent. And now we will press it. This should prove to be interesting as we have things going in multiple directions and we haven't pressed at all yet. And I've never done it this way. Normally I press as I go. So this is different. Yeah. That I can press whichever way I want. And that one I pressed in 2 different directions. Of course I did. I knew that was going to happen at some point in time. Iron's not hot. All right, water. That warms up. All right, let's get some fabric. This might be enough. This actually looks like it might even be pre-washed. I don't know why I would have done that, but it definitely does not appear starched. So it must be pre-washed. Okay, let's go back here. Let's see if we can get this pressed a little bit. So as I'm pressing this, I'm looking. Some of the corner tips are the points, the intersections aren't bad. Some of them aren't great. I think from a distance, they will all look just fine. But this is why I don't like to do it this way. I like to press in between. It takes longer, but I just think it looks nicer. But this isn't really bad. I have to say, I'm surprisingly happy with it. So I'm glad I did it. I'm glad I did a test run like this, because I can say I've done it, and I can, if I need to, it won't upset me too much. Okay. Here we go. And there it is. Now, as you can see, because I'm looking at it on my monitor, it looks fine. It looks perfectly fine. Like I said, I know that there are points that are not very good, but it's not going to go in a quilt competition, so I think it's not bad. Now, here's something else. So as we were doing the half square triangle show, I made the comment that I thought maybe I'd put a skinny border on here and then a really wide border of the leaf pattern. And the more I thought about it, the more I think it would distract from the design. Because if I put a square border around it and then another square border around it, you wouldn't see the squares as well. And I could be wrong, but that's just, I came up here and I looked at the wall a couple different times yesterday, and the more I thought about it, the more I went, you know, I don't think it really needs a border. So then I had to go round and round with myself trying to decide what to use for the binding. I'm leaning towards the brown, the solid brown. I have a little bit of it left. I don't know if I have enough to do the binding. I don't think I do. So then it goes back to, do I do the floral pattern or the leaf pattern? And I think that's what I'm going to end up doing, because there's nowhere near, this is all I have left of the brown. So there's nowhere near enough to do the binding. So I'm going to have to go with the leaf pattern. I hope it doesn't distract too much from the squares on the front. All right. So that being said, let's get our binding made first, and then we'll get the backing. So the binding, there's my paper and my pencil. $32 and a half. $32 and 3/4, of course. And 24. We'll go with a half. 24 and a half. And 24 and a half. All right. And of course I forgot what it was. 32 and 32? 32 and a half. All right, so determine binding. You have 4 sides, so you need all 4. Come on. There we go. Calculator, finally. 24.5 plus 24.5 plus 32.5 plus 32.5. So that's 114 inches. There are 42 inches in a strip. So 114 divided by 42 is 2.7. So I'm going to need 3 strips. And recently, I discovered that I don't dislike using a 2 1/4 inch binding. So I am going to use a 2 1/4 inch binding. Actually, no, I'm not. Here's why. I found this in the back of my closet. I was looking in the closet for some brown fleece, because instead of using batting, I was going to use fleece on this, on the back of this, make it soft on the back. But I found this, and I have no idea where it came from, why it's here, or what's going on, because I no longer use polyester batting. It's a crib size, so it's not real big. I'm going to go ahead and use the polyester batting, and it is a high loft batting. So I'm not going to go to 2 1/4 inch strips. I am going to go to a 2 1/2 inch strip because I don't know how high loft is. I have been using the Warm and Natural cotton batting that's really thin for years now. And so I don't know how big that's going to be. So I am going to go with the 2 1/2 inch strip. So 2.5 times 3, 15, 6, 7.5 inches. I need 7.5 inches. So go to 8 and clip and tear the fabric. Since this was already torn on the other side, tearing to 8 inches was fine. If it hadn't been torn on the other side, I would have had to go to 9.5 inches. I've always had 2 inches on when I tear. But like I said, this was torn on the other side already, so I know that we're going to be pretty even. That's not good. No, we don't like that shifted like that. We want it even. There's some pretty serious wrinkling going on here. So we're going to spray it with water in that area and try again. Fold it a second time so I can use my little ruler instead of having to use the big long one. Okay, there we go. And now rotary cutter, little ruler, square up at the bottom. You can't see what I'm doing. There we go. Let's put you back there. That wasn't a bad spot. It was a little too far though. There we go. All right, so I'm squaring up at the bottom. I'm cutting off the least amount that I can. Rotate the fabric. Measure in 2.5 inches. Measure in 2.5 inches. And last but not least, our third strip at 2.5 inches. Voila. 3 strips for binding. Now let's go to the sewing machine. Because the fabric has an obvious right side and a wrong side, we don't need to pre-press it. So we take our fabric, we lay it out. We take our second strip of fabric and we make across it. And you'll see I didn't take any of the salvages off or anything like that. And we shift just slightly. All right, so from your vantage point on the camera, you see we have a V. You don't want to stitch down the middle from the inside of the V to the outside of the V. That won't work. You have to go across the V. And if you'd like to get out a ruler and a pen and draw, feel free. I don't. I just eyeball it. Okay, so I'm taking this piece of fabric, the other side, and I put it upright, just as I did with the first one, and I take my third piece of binding and do the exact same thing, make a V. It's actually an L, I guess, because it's a right angle, but when you look at it this way, it looks kind of like a V. And making sure that the salvage is not caught, go in and stitch across. Now we have 3 pieces of fabric joined together at 2 points. I'm going to cut them apart so they're not connected anymore. I am going to take my ruler and I am going to put the 1/4 inch on the line that I just stitched and cut off the fabric. That's why I didn't mess with the salvage, because I knew I'm going to cut off the selvage at this point. I do the same thing on this piece. Line it up on the 1/4 inch. Cut it off. Then we find one end. Cut off the selvage. And we go to the other end. And we cut off the selvage. Excellent. It was just that easy. Now comes the fun part. Instead of pressing, I guess I should have stayed on this camera. Instead of pressing to one side or the other, like we do when we're piecing, when we do the binding, we're going to press the fabric open. That way we're going to have the fabric evenly spread out on our binding. So, sewing machine, binding, or sewing machine, ironing board. I've got the fabric pressed open, finger pressed anyway. So now I want to press it with the heat. Wonderful. Find our second seam. Finger press it open. And the amount of binding you're going to need is going to depend on how big your quilt is. So now you take the binding and you fold it in half and you press it. And yes, you can buy pre-made binding. There's no reason that if you want to use pre-made binding that you can't. I like to use corresponding fabric to the quilt top. So I always make my own binding. I feel like I bought some at some point because I think there's some over there, and I feel like I did use some for something because I had it and I didn't know why I had it, so I just used it because why not? But I don't remember when or where. I just have this vague recollection of having done that. So, like I said, most of the time I just make my own binding. It's not that big of a deal. It doesn't take that long. The trick is if you're using fabric that doesn't have an obvious right side and a wrong side, this folding it in half step you have to do before you sew it together, and then you have to fix it after it's sewn together because the joints need to be pressed where you've joined the fabric together, the different strips. So that's the only time it's an extra step is if you're using fabric that doesn't have an obvious right and wrong side. I said in this case, I knew which side was right, which side was wrong. It was no big deal. Oh, and we made the binding before we did the sandwich and everything for the quilt because I'm going to be switching to my walking foot, and I'm also going to be switching to a different thread. So I want to get this out of the way before I do all that. I'm going to switch to my quilting needle instead of a universal needle. And although I, on multiple occasions, have made my binding with the walking foot, with the quilting needle, and with the regular thread, I like to get it, I prefer to try and get it out of the way so it's made and all I have to do is stitch it on. I don't always remember. So therefore that's why sometimes I do it after the fact, sometimes I do it before. Alright. This is done. We now have binding that we can use to put on the quilt after we've quilted it. Okay, now let's see here. I need 24 and a half, 26, 28 inches by 32, 33, 34, 35, 36, 37. Right. This fabric is standard 42-inch fabric. At least I assume it is. I'm going to go with that. It's on here kind of weird. Again, looks cut it anyway. And so I'm going to cut it 28 or tear it 28 inches wide. And when it comes to the backing, the tearing isn't nearly as important as when you're piecing, because this, although I guess a grain should matter a little bit, I'm going to be matching this up no matter which way I go. All right. So I have a bunch of stuff here that I need out of my way. Because I need workspace. There we go. And let's see here. This is 45 by 60. And where's the 45? That's the 45. Excellent. And apparently I've used this because there's something cut out of it. Alrighty. Again, I have no idea why I have it, but I do, so we're going to go with it. Is it folded anywhere else? No, that's it. Alright, so that's the actual batting. Okay. Here's what I'm going to do then. This is really challenging to use, just so you know. You get spoiled when you use other stuff. It's prickly and sticks to everything. Alright, there we go. We'll put that back in the bag later. There's that. Where's the brown? There's the brown. Let's make sure that our quilt is on the backing. And it is. Excellent. Safety pins. We start in the middle. Go through all the layers. And the batting, the amount of basting, that's what this is. I am using my safety pins to baste the fabric, the batting, and the backing together. And the number of safety pins you use is up to you. You want to get it as tight as you can. Let's see here. I thought I had brown. Well, you know what? I don't have to use it out of here. This is cotton. I'm using polyester batting. I can use my my polyester thread. Excuse me. All right, let's cross in front of this camera. There we go. And that is embroidery thread. That's not what I want. Where did it go? It was all just right here. I know it was. I just used it. All right. I don't know where my regular thread went. I must have hidden it from myself. All right. Now back we go to the cotton thread then. Huh. Anyway. Let's see, what's that? That actually might work. Is it red and black or orange and black? It's a nice navy blue. I thought I had a nice big, I got a big green. That might work. I'm gonna use the green. There we go. Problem solved. Okay. It's got a bobbin. Yes, it does. Over to the sewing machine. Alright, so I'm taking off the thread that I use for piecing. And I'm taking off the needle. I'm going to use the needle to finish another project. So I'm going to put it over there with that other project and get my quilting needle. Okay. Walking foot's on, needle's on, thread. And this is a nice dark hunter green, so it's a very nice fall color. Now, of course, because I have a brown on the backing, I could use a brown in the bobbin. That would be no problem whatsoever. I'm not going to, just because I didn't feel like hunting for it. I thought I had brown sitting right on the top, but it wasn't there. I swear it was there last time I looked. But anyway, all right, so I'm now going to tell my machine, instead of the standard 2.5, I'm going to go to 3.5. So I'm going to raise it by 1, just like I lowered it by 1 before. And I am going, the batting needs to have no more than 2 to 4 inches between stitching. So since we learned when we made this design up that there is 3 inches between of the strips, I'm going to stitch in the ditch along the V's. And just like when we're piecing, when we're using the walking foot, we do not push the fabric through or pull the fabric through. The walking feet, or the feed dogs on the top and the bottom, take care of that for us. Whoa! Oh, knocking things over. Okay. Okay, now we'll do here. Let's go over on this side and do here. Oh. Let's get those out of the way. And we stitched there, so now we're going to stitch here. Now this line, let's see about going. I'm going to go in the middle next. It's not really the middle. We started in the middle. I'm going to go to the next part over. That doesn't actually connect to the outside. Here we go. Right in here. This is going to be our first actual square. Up a little bit so we can get it. I just don't want to cover up the camera too much. All right. Oh, I guess this isn't a full square either. The only full square is in the middle. This will be the full square. That one I'll connect up later. Come on, there we go. Okay. Let's see. We've got this strip over here. And that doesn't end. All right. So. This is the one I'm going to join up from the last square when I thought I was getting a whole square and I wasn't. Let's do this corner first. Get it out of the way. And then do that last corner. All right, last piece to quilt. Excellent. All right. Well, that's a problem. Okay, let's see. Bring you all back here. There we go. Now let's see here. Let's trim up the short side. And where is my other? There we go. On this batting, I don't want to use my good rotary cutter, so I'm going to use one of the cheaper ones that I have. Go. Trim that down. I'm going to do the other short side. I like to do the short sides first and then the long sides. It just, I don't know, makes me happier. Now I know why I don't use this batting anymore. It's so thick that the rotary cutter's having trouble not cutting through it, but being low enough. Okay, now alongside. Go. Square up the corner. And especially with this high loft batting, there's going to be distortions. That's why you always cut your backing larger than the quilt top, because there can be adjustments because of the batting. And then, like I said, when I go to put my rotary cutter down, there's a lip where the blade is, and it's catching on the ruler. Because I can't get the ruler down far enough. The batting makes it sit so high up that the distance from this lip to where the blade is challenging. All right, so push down on the ruler. There we go. Glad I cut my binding wider. I would not have been a happy camper. I may still be griping when I try and bind this. Okay, I have no idea where that came from. That's thread. Okay, that didn't work out so well. There we go. All right, binding. I do not pin my binding on. If you want to, go for it. I never have. It's just, I shouldn't say that. When I first started quilting, I did pin my binding on all the time. And I found that everything shifted anyway, so it was always annoying. So I don't pin my binding anymore. Okay, long side, start somewhere in the middle. Do not start on an end. That will not work for you. Make sure you give yourself a few inches. And this is the wrong foot. There we go. Okay, coming to a corner here. So now we stitch to within 1/4 of an inch of the end of the fabric. My foot happens to have a marking on it, so I know where that is. You then turn your entire quilt sideways and stitch off the edge. Don't cut the fabric or thread. I will probably do that at some point because I do it all the time. Then you take something that's straight, doesn't matter what it is, put it underneath and make it so that the top of the binding is even with the top of the quilt. Turn it so you're doing your 1/4 of an inch again and start stitching. I usually go down a few stitches to get it going and then turn the quilt. And get everything lined back up again so you're going straight. Coming up to a corner again. Make sure everything's straight, flat, right on the mark. Okay. Turn the quilt and stitch off the edge. Do not cut the thread. And I'm not necessarily announcing that to you, I'm announcing that to myself because, like I said, usually it happens on the 4th corner. I don't know what it is with me in the 4th corner and why I think I need to cut the thread at that point. I don't know, but I always seem to do it. All right. Turn it so you're at your 1/4 of an inch and start stitching. Get a little ways in and straighten things out a little bit. So that you're going straight. Corner number 3. I almost pushed that cut the thread button. Almost did it. Caught myself. Oh. hate it when that happens. So I've got a seam and a corner in the same spot. It's not always my favorite thing, but I think it's far enough down that we'll survive. It won't look too bad. Here we're only going to sew down a little ways. We're not going to sew all the way down because we're going to join the binding so that it can lay nicely. Okay, let's see, how far down am I going to go? Oh. Actually, it's a all right. So now we've gotten to the end here. And this is where the fun begins. Now we have to do some calculating. So the overlap, not from a stitch or a stitch, but the overlap of the binding. So you see we have two pieces of binding here. 1, 2. Where they overlap needs to be 2.5 inches. If I was using 2 1/4 inch binding, it would be 2 1/4 inches. The overlap needs to be whatever the width of the binding is. So that's where the overlap starts. 2.5 inches is right there. So the top flap, the part that I've got the most of, I'm going to cut. Well, I would if I could see. There it is. Like, where did I just put that? There's the clip. There it is. So now there's a 2.5 inch overlap. And this gets tricky. We take the binding and we take the other binding and we overlap them in a V just like we did before, or an L or whatever you want to call it. And we have to stitch just like we did. Now I'm going to lower my stitch length just because. I'm not certain what happened there, so let's see if we can get this to work. or if we're going to get an error message. Guessing that the bobbin wasn't seated correctly. But now it, yes, it's the bobbin. You can see the problem? Okay, let's pull the bobbin out. There's extra thread sitting here. That's what part of the problem is. Reset the bobbin. Redo the top thread also, just in case it slipped somewhere along the lines. There's another piece of thread. And now seam ripper. Definitely don't want to stitch over that mess. All we do is get knots in our thread and make a mess of everything. There we go. Okay, let's try this again. Okay. V. Much better. Raise our stitch length back up. And if you would like, pull out your rotary cutter and all that good stuff. I normally at this stage will just trim it down. But if you'd like, you can use the rotary cutter, cut it down correctly to the right size, and then you can even press it. Now you'd have to be careful with this particular quilt because I'm using the polyester batting, so that could be, you can melt the batting, which you don't want to do. So. And yes, the machine beeped at us because we are out of thread again, or bobbin thread. Different color thread, so it makes sense, but okay. I am going to flip this around and clip it. Let's get this wound. speed is still turned down. I never turned it back up, so that's good. Thread out of the way. There we go. Alright, I don't need that up top. And then when it comes to the corners, I do one side. And then I do the other side. And then I make sure that the fold of the corner goes the direction that I'm stitching. So I'm going to be stitching down in that way. So I want to make sure the fold goes the way I'm going to be stitching. I love these clips. They make it so much easier. Pinning used to be a pain in the butt. Well, and what's funny is this is one of the few places where I actually still do all this. I don't know why I still do, but for some reason I just can't stop myself from putting this binding around and clipping it in place. Because again, just like with everything else, it does shift slightly as you're doing it. So the clips are no longer in the same spot. But for some reason, still I do this. Every time. All right. This is one of the times where I do the knot at the beginning and the end because it's not going to be stitched in anywhere. And I need the other foot on my walking foot again. There it is. There we go. All right. almost there. All right, let's see. So I guess I could have done a 2 1/4 inch seam because, or 2 1/4 inch binding, because it did overlap quite a bit. That's interesting. I've never seen that before, but here we go. That is my fall project. Oops. It allowed us to play with half square triangles. And if you do one of your own, you can do whatever design you want on for the top. Remember we did a thing in the last part where we talked about all the different directions that the half square triangles can sit. So design it however you want. Put it together however you want. Make the squares whatever size you want. I could have used 6-inch squares instead of 4-inch squares, and that would have made this even bigger. I do like the binding. I was worried that the binding was going to be too much, but I think that it's small enough that it works. And I don't think it needed borders. I think if I had put borders on here, because it's asymmetrical, it's this isn't in the middle. I think it would have looked weird. I do have some fabric that's wooden. It looks like wood. The fabric's not wooden, but it looks like wood. And a picture frame might have worked as a border, but I think I like it just the way it is. Sometimes putting too much on something is just too much. I think with all of the imperfections that it does have, because it was my first time designing in this fashion, I'm probably going to post it out to sell as like a pet blanket, especially with this high loft batting. It makes it kind of poofy, and I think that would work for a pet, whether it be a dog or a cat, I guess even a hamster, but that's a really big blanket for a hamster. But my son had a ferret. Maybe the ferret would enjoy hiding underneath it and running around underneath. You never know. But I think that's how I'll post it on Etsy as a pet blanket, because it does have a lot of imperfections in it that would keep me from selling it as an actual wall hanging for someone to display. But all right. Well, thank you for joining me today. We'll be back next week when we will be working on the Halloween project, I believe. I'm 90% certain. I will be posting tomorrow for certain what it is. And I hope you all enjoyed this, and we'll see y'all next time.